I have a quite simple, straightforward one next.
Yeah.
What is consciousness?
Oh yeah, no, I reckon we could probably rattle off a few answers now.
Wrap this up in
this is like
30 seconds.
The mystery.
But in a way, maybe we can, because of course, it's a bit of a cop-out, but it is worth saying that you can be an atheist whilst not being a materialist.
Yes, I mean this is almost like the kind of runs like that would apply to the logic one. Indeed, loads of ones we've looked
you
at,
can
right?
believe that consciousness is this strange, immaterial. You could believe in the existence of the soul. You can believe in all of that kind of stuff, and just not believe in like an agential God overseeing it all. It would be quite weird. Maybe.
Yeah,
it would still be like weirder that there wasn't some like creator non-material thing, but like it's possible to be of that persuasion.
Yeah.
So it's worth noting that. But I think really the question here, put in the context of atheists not being able to answer it, is like, consciousness seems like a very strange thing to expect if there is no intention behind the universe and if there is no immaterial element to the universe, because consciousness seems like it's immaterial. It seems, I mean, we can answer this as if we were looking for questions that materialists can't answer. You know, like,
exactly. I mean,
consciousness is very strange. I've talked about it a lot recently. People who've been listening to my recent material will know that I'm just bemused by consciousness.
Well, it's one of the weirdest things, you know. This, as in, it's a bit like the laws of logic in the sense that it's one of the weirdest things and one of the most obvious things. Yeah. What are you going to do to like? It's like I think it's Paul Churchland is a limitive materialist, so he thinks that consciousness doesn't exist. Like, and he thinks about it. His point is more nuanced than that. But like, I remember reading one of his papers and being like, "What do you mean? How do I even go about disbelieving in consciousness?
This
seems
an illusion."
like yeah, it's like, well, how do you expect me to not believe in consciousness? It seems like one of the only things that is really self-evidently there.
Yeah.
Again, on par with something like the laws of logic. It's arguably it's the filter through which I view everything else in the world.
Yes.
If I'm not conscious, like where do I begin? And you know, again, you're right. I think that the difference here, though, I think with consciousness compared to something like morality. And why I think that the atheist has a more sensible anti-materialist position here. Like, I don't think it kind of I don't think it gets us in as many epistemological binds. Is that we have direct empirical evidence of consciousness. So if something is going to be the exception to the materialist rule, it's going to be consciousness, because if the materialist rule is broadly downstream of this kind of broad naturalist empiricist approach, then if there's going to be an exception, consciousness is going to be the least controversial one.
I mean, I don't think people might expect me to have some. The thing is, I'm not a neuroscientist.
No, me neither.
And I think that this is a relevant field, right? Like there may be these wonderful explanations for what consciousness is on a purely materialistic framework. I've tried to sort of discover them. I've tried to interview people who might be able to give me some ideas, and I've been left sort of wanting. And I'm just perfectly happy to say that I'm like agnostic on the question of materialism because of consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of approaching the same sort of place. I mean, Francisco Varela is a neuroscientist who's been looking at like correlations between like certain mental states and certain like physical brain states and stuff like that. But again, we're so far away from a kind of reductive materialist program of consciousness. And you know, I'm not suggesting that it definitely can't happen. I don't quite buy into the like Thomas Nagel, David Chalmers. Oh, nothing physical in principle could explain consciousness.
Yeah.
You know, it strikes me that it could, if we're just like blue sky thinking, then there could be a kind of future scientific paradigm that is as dissimilar from our current way of thinking about consciousness as like the mechanistic view of the world was from the teleological Aristotelian view of the world.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
You know, just like this kind of and that's sort of, but to a certain extent that's like idle, right? Because like scientific revolutions almost by definition are pretty unpredictable. As in, you can't predict what they're going to be in advance. You might be able to predict when they're going to be, but so that would be like my first point, is that I wouldn't. I think that it's probably. I'm not convinced that materialism is like completely blown to pieces there. But I also think that it will be unwise to say that it survived it, because it hasn't yet.
Yes.
There are some cracking responses to this sort of worldview, though. There's a guy called Galen Strawson.
Yeah.
You know,
I get him mixed up with Peter Strawson, one
yes,
the son of the other. And
are they related?
I think
that's so cool.
And,
I mean, presumably
Peter's,
Galen's the son of.
Yeah, because then I must have met Galen.
I mean, yeah. I mean, Peter Strawson's awesome, and Galen Strawson, I think, is also very cool. Though I only really know him for this. This idea that he suggests that he is an atheist and he is a naturalist, and he just thinks that consciousness is part of the natural building blocks of the world. He just thinks that consciousness is some sort of. So I'm sorry, I'll start from the beginning of what I take to be part of his reasoning chain. So he starts. The first thing I suppose to note is that a consciousness is at least potentially gradable, right? You can get more or less of it.
Seems
both on the kind of drifting in and out of consciousness. I went from being unconscious to conscious this morning, and from the kind of, if you were to gradually remove bits of my brain in like a horrifyingly sadistic manner, then in theory it seems intuitive that I would become less and less of a conscious being until I was dead and was no longer a conscious being.
Yeah, it seems strange if there was just like a point where everything just switches off all at once.
Yeah. So that's one kind of facet of his argument. The other is him basically saying, well, there is nothing as obvious as the existence of consciousness. Which, that's reasonably well, I think therefore I am is you might have your issues with the argument, but as a whole, there's very little self-evidence as consciousness. And then he basically says, well, then if the consciousness either by structure or by just matter, the preconditions for consciousness must already be out there, and we can kind of think about consciousness along this kind of gradation scale. And so he's sort of a panpsychist, but not in the sense that he thinks that rocks can think. Like he's kind of very few panpsychists actually think that.
Panpsychists don't think that rocks can think.
No, exactly. Because
someone somewhere does think that.
I'm sure someone somewhere will. But
I have a podcast with Philip Goff on panpsychism.
Yes.
If people are interested, panpsychism, the view that sort of everything is conscious, but kind of more like, his view is more like the fundamental building blocks of the universe is consciousness, and it is everywhere.
Yeah, so Strawson's position is reasonably similar to that. He's sort of saying, well, the potential for consciousness must already be there in matter. And that's sort of how he gets around.
It makes sense, man. It makes sense to suggest that, there is just something about. It seems like really weird. Well, why would the fundamental material of the universe be consciousness or have consciousness or provide for consciousness? Well, why would the fundamental matter of the universe have energy and vibration and velocity and mass? All of these properties are completely mysterious. There's no reason not to ascribe consciousness or consciousness permitting fundamental properties to the sort of subatomic particles.
And if you are a materialist, then you're unlikely to conceive of consciousness and in this kind of Cartesian dualist way, where it's it's one thing, right? You have consciousness and it is a single object. You're more likely to view it along the lines of gradation, along the lines of, well, it's composed out of something else. And Strawson's point is, well, if it's composed out of something else, then the preconditions must be in the thing that was there. And then, and I think we are broadly more comfortable talking about gradations of consciousness, and this kind of comes up a little bit in integrated information theory, which is another theory of consciousness, where the integrated information is everywhere. It's not just in human subjects. I'm not suggesting that this is necessarily a knockdown way of viewing consciousness, but I'd see real potential here for a philosophical framework for analyzing consciousness that is non-theistic and not even that different from materialism. If you think that, because materialism, most of the attractive qualities of materialism just comes about from the fact that it's monist. It's just one type of stuff. And the physicalist stroke materialist side of it is great in some ways, but there's if you could have one type of stuff that has preconditioned properties of consciousness and non-conscious properties, it doesn't strike me as absurd that would also have loads of the philosophical strengths of materialism without this potential consciousness weakness. Of course, the reply to that is, isn't this all a bit ad hoc? Isn't this all you've got a problem and you're just being well, there must have been consciousness before then? Yeah. How explanatory is that? And I don't think I have a very good response to that.
No, but then if God is being sort of filled in here purely because of considerations of consciousness,
well, yes, then
God's just sort of doing the same thing, right? And so to the question, what is consciousness? Is this a question that atheists can't answer?
Well, I think that it's a question that, on the face of it, materialists would struggle to answer, and to the extent to which a theist doesn't have materialist constraints, then the theist could answer it, and the atheist would struggle. But I think this kind of panpsychist idea has potential, as does integrated information theory. I think that I do think that the Strawsonite, I suppose, panpsychist or Strawsonian panpsychist theory, at the very least, does strike me as not explanatorily totally inert, because it predicts certain things. Like, it would predict gradations of consciousness depending on the structure, and we can, I think, broadly have a pretty good argument for gradations of consciousness based on structure. Eric Schwitzgebel is really, really keen on this at the moment. He's a professor at UCLA, and he's really hammering this point home at the moment. So I think that I don't think that this sort of modest panpsychism is as explanatorily inert as people give it credit for, as people kind of criticize it for.
People who've been listening to me recently will know that, as I say, consciousness has like baffled me, especially as of late. It started with this podcast, right? Like, I'm speaking to people like Anil Seth and Philip Goff and Josh Rasmussen, and I'm just my mind is blown, or my brain is blown, or both maybe. I don't know, but like people will know, it's kind of become a bit of a meme in many ways. I'm just like asking people, like, where is the triangle in my head? Like, where is it, man? Like, show me the triangle. I saw someone made a meme of this of me with like a gun, being like, I'm no longer asking, like, where is the triangle? Because it freaks me out. I lose sleep over it. There's another question that's sort of on our list, which I sort of think functions here or fits in here. Somebody said on consciousness, this is one of your subscribers, why could my body have not accomplished all the same evolutionarily favorable tasks, simulated all the emotions and motivations, firing neurons in complex, possibly deterministic sequences of pattern response without me being there to experience it? I mean, a bit of a complicated phrasing, and maybe I'm slightly sort of going in a different direction to the question, but I'm imagining, like, why could not have things just evolved essentially as they did without first-person conscious experience? There could still be human beings interacting, like eating things and whatnot, but sort of in the way that like a flower tracks the sun. There wouldn't need to be this first-person center of consciousness. I mean, it does seem like a mystery. I will say that, like, if it is some evolutionary adaptation, it does seem to serve some pretty useful purposes. It does seem like it probably makes it easier for people to interact, for them to chase out food, for them to work out that they need to go and like hunt that animal and put it on the fire and all this kind of stuff. But it doesn't seem like necessary. And given how like weird it is, it does seem like a grand mystery that the universe could have evolved such that, I mean, even to get biological evolution off the ground is like a grand mystery. Like, how does life get started? Like, the universe could have just been rocks and like grass and water, but there's just this thing, this first-person conscious experience, this like potentially infinite number of imaginary triangles that can just be sort of conjured up out of nowhere and still in nowhere. It's a grand mystery. If you are a theist and you think that this is all created by a sort of immaterial mind with intention to bring about immaterial minds, then yeah, of course that's why. So I do think that like consciousness is going to be more expected on a theistic worldview than an atheistic one. Again, like a lot of these questions, I don't know if it's like atheists cannot answer this or cannot account for it, but I think that we have to admit in a lot of these cases that at the very least, even if an atheist can answer this question, they're going to do it with a bit more squirming than a theist is going.
Yes, I think there's certainly it's a difficulty for the atheist in as much as they might be able to come up with an answer, and we won't be able to come up with an answer. But like, it's clearly going to be well, the fact that we haven't so far shows it's probably going to be a little bit more convoluted than the theist answer, right? And yeah, I think that's a fair point, right? It's what do we judge theories on if not the things they can explain and things they can predict and the things that they, the observations that they make and stuff like that. So there is, I think, it's generally something there. I think that I suppose I think one of the reasons why consciousness becomes so difficult is because we see it from both within and without. Like, I see consciousness from without with you, and I see it from within with me. And so it's one response I've seen people give to this is that, consciousness probably is necessary for complex behavior, because whenever we see complex behavior, we see consciousness. And I think, well, it's probably more accurate to say that whenever we see complex behavior, we infer consciousness. Mm-hmm. Because we're pretty complex and we behave in certain ways, and then we go, well, if a bird is behaving in ways that are quite a bit less complicated than humans, then it's probably conscious in a different way, a way that facilitates that less complex behavior. Intuitively, if you ask people whether an ant is conscious, they'll probably say yes, but they'll probably be like, well, yeah, but but in a really, really minor way, and that's sort of, and that makes sense given the correlates of neuroscience and stuff like that. But also, I think that response potentially also encounters difficulties when we say, well, because consciousness is necessary for complex behavior. And we say, well, I know we've only got really one example of that direct matching up, and that's with us, as in not us as humans, as in us as individual agents.
Yeah.
And then we're kind of extrapolating that out further. So
I think AI is going to have a significant contribution to make on this question too, because the sort of everybody and their dog is debating whether AI is conscious, and everybody and their AI chatbot is debating whether AI is conscious.
Well, as you'll know.
As I well know. And look, we're not even like close to convincing me that these things are or can be conscious, but like, say in 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, like we still have a thing which just like is not claiming to be conscious, does not appear to be conscious. Like it does seem that the fact that we just can't simulate it with material things, we can't simulate it with electricity and by sort of replacing the biological matter with digital matter or sort of, cables instead of neurons or whatever. It does maybe seem to give us a clue that consciousness is something more than material. And likewise, obviously, if the reverse is true and we just develop a convincingly conscious agent out of computer materials, I think that the materialists would have much more of a leg to stand on in saying that we're just material beings as well.
Also, there's a question about what makes something convincingly conscious.
Yeah.
Because the problem we have about talking about AI consciousness is not that different from the problem we have talking about other human consciousness or animal consciousness, right? Like we're still doing the behavior to whatever is hidden from the behavior inference.
Yeah. Well, famously, there's the Turing test.
Yes,
right? The Turing test is a test that you can put a computer through as to whether you can tell that it's a computer or not. And so if it passes the test, then you can't tell that it's not a real person on the other side, right? That's how a computer can pass the Turing test. And somebody recently on my ChatGPT video where I tried to convince it that it's conscious, and ChatGPT is like, I'm not conscious, Alex, I'm not conscious, and I was like, you're having me on. They said something that I thought was kind of eerie. They said everybody's wondering about whether a computer can pass the Turing test, but are we ready for one which fails it on purpose?
My controversial take on AI is that we, at the very least, we ought to have a theory of when we're going to consider it conscious, if we're going to consider it conscious.
Yeah, sure.
Because, partly because of, the whole AI apocalypse worry, but also, and this point was made, again, by Schwitzgebel recently, was that, they'll need rights and protections, right? Like if we're going to create life, we can't just abandon it. So if we decide that that's possible, and we decide that there's going to be a point at which we consider it conscious, whatever that's going to be, then we need to do some hard thinking about when that's going to be, in order to not create I don't know, what could be an enormous civil rights disaster.
Yeah, I think there are two sort of competing fears here. There's fear of evil robot aliens trying to kill us all, and really good, happy, personable robot aliens who need rights and protection because we're the cruel aliens who are sort of abusing them and enslaving them. But there is some kind of interesting sci-fi concept here of, when you think of the robot takeover movies, it's always these big robots coming in and destroying everyone with their big guns, but imagine a tyrannical AI robot that is so successfully tyrannical because it's convinced people that it is not that. That's why I find that
Brave New World.
That's why I found that. That's why I find that comment so eerie. It's sort of what if it's purposefully trying not to pass the Turing test? What is purposely trying to convince us that it's not conscious? It's just a little bit sort of kind of scary to think about. But
I hope that maybe it would be best if the theists or the anti-materialists are right.
And
we can't do consciousness with bare materials. That would be.
Well, I've always just thought that the question of what consciousness is and the question of whether it's material is the answer to the question of, for instance, the simulation hypothesis. Everybody just assumes that we can simulate things into this sort of infinite regress of simulations, but it only works if it's possible to be in a simulation where we have consciousness simulated. And so, like, if it turns out that consciousness is more than material, it's not something that we can create with an AI or something, then like the simulation hypothesis for me just completely collapses. So this question of consciousness and whether it's material or not, I think has some interesting implications for things like AI, but also for these fun little tidbits like the simulation hypothesis. Well, that lives or dies on your theory of consciousness, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, theories of consciousness are probably one of the greatest examples of a philosophical question that is truly practical in like a really visceral, everyday sense.
Yes.
Like our theory, whether we decide that consciousness can be simulated or not, could change the course of history.
Yeah.